Bonus episode, Riot in Cell Block 11, Quarantine Special Edition. All right, welcome to Point Blank. This is a special short quarantine edition of the show. We thought we would maybe do a little short episode here discussing a film. Justin and I just got done watching Riot in Cell Block 11. So we're gonna talk about that film a little bit, but first let's just check in. Justin, how are you doing in this new and exciting time?
That is a great question. I'm not sure how I'm doing, but so far, I mean, in terms of the crisis, I've been faring well. I've been handling this well. I don't have too much anxiety about things, but there are quite a few adjustments where we have to make that can make life, I don't know, entertaining, bizarre, confusing. Just to be clear, we did watch this film together, but we did it through social distancing. We were both in our own spaces.
Yes. More than 6 feet apart.
Yes, I sneezed on Kurt 0 times.
Good.
Yeah, so it's been good. As a educator, that's the biggest headache for me has been trying to figure out how to get all the faculty I work with on board to suddenly have to teach online despite not having much online experience. It's a stressful moment for them and for our students who also will have to adapt to a very new world when they come back from spring break, whatever that is, in these strange times. So it's been okay. I mean, spring is here. Spring is in the air, as you might hear as I'm walking around my neighborhood listening to bird call, and things typically would be seeming like feeling pretty good, optimistic, the sense that spring is here and summer's coming and the school year is approaching its end, and all is well, except we have this strange doomy cast on everything that though invisible affects a daily life pretty tremendously. So it's definitely strange. I imagine the same could be said for you in having just recently been on quote unquote vacation and whatnot, Kurt.
Yeah, it's been strange. I mean, it's been strange from the start, seeing as I do live in Seattle, and we're no longer the epicenter of this thing in the United States, but
Thanks, New York.
Yeah, we were for a while, and we've also. I was on the boat. I came back into it, and then almost promptly went on vacation to Hawaii, which was planned well in advance, and we really did leave before things had really taken off. So, it was a tough decision from the get-go as to whether or not to take that trip. We did go because there was family involved and everything, and there weren't any cases on the islands when we left. By the time we were wrapping up our trip, we actually did come home a few days early because there were cases showing up on the islands, and there was definitely a push from the locals to hey, first of all, don't come if you haven't come to Hawaii already, and if you're here, maybe you want to go home, and that's pretty reasonable. I mean, it's a tough call for them. Their economy's tourist based, but for example, on the Big Island, I think they only have like 25 or something ICU beds on the whole island, so they can't handle a lot of cases. So we
the pros and cons there are pretty obvious.
Yeah. So, I mean, we decided to go home early, which I think is a good call, but we're back in Seattle where people have been dealing with this a bit longer than the rest of the country. And it's odd. The city is definitely shut down like much of the rest of the country, but we'll see what happens. I expect, we're not in a state with a shelter in place order yet, but I imagine that's coming. And it's also uncertainty because both, my job is somewhat up in the air. Oil prices have tanked, and my partner, her job is also on a stopping point right now. So we'll see what happens. We'll make the best of it, but it is tough.
The economic uncertainty is, I mean, I feel for people. This is a terrible, way to come into the new decade, having job insecurity, having the typical fears of instability that come with an election season, and then on top of it, all these health issues and concerns about loss of friends and family. I'm lucky. My position's okay for now. I'm an educator and full time and all that, and my wife's all right. But we've been really putting our feet down on the campus about making sure that people are getting paid. Adjuncts, we're not cutting adjuncts loose because of issues with enrollment, and we're not cutting student workers loose because there's nothing to do. Right now, our people are all still getting paid, and I'm very happy for that, and it makes me feel confident, at least now in some of the leadership at my school, for sticking to their guns and helping people out when they need it. But it just really depends on the uncertainty lies in depending on how long this goes. What's fall going to look like? What's summer going to look like? These things are big question marks, and that's probably keeping a lot of people up at night. Which is why we should be reading and watching films and escaping to other places where we can contemplate these things in our unconscious. So,
let's do a film review. And unfortunately, we didn't totally pick a truly escapist film. We picked a film with some social commentary, of course, because that's us.
You can't really. We have a tendency, I think.
Yes. Well, listeners. So the film that we looked at today is Riot in Cell Block 11. Comes from 1954, and it's definitely in the category of that noir film, drama, crime type movie that came out specifically on February 28th, 1954. It's available pretty easily to find online for free. And it's only an hour and 20 minutes. And my initial review is I give it a big thumbs up. I thought it was pretty good.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. It's a Criterion Collection film, which was definitely an appealing aspect to me. But in addition, the film itself, while most of these actors I'm not very familiar with, the film itself, the cinematography, the general look is definitely film noir. There is a balance between, some would argue that, like so many prison movies, it's exploitative, but at the same time, there's an equal dose of serious social messaging that in part comes from the producer. I don't remember the producer's name. Do you happen to have that on your end, Kurt?
Give me just a moment here, and I do know that I have it here something.
Sure. We'll get his name, but he was actually inspired to put the money down for this film because he had spent some years or some months in prison after essentially shooting his wife's lover. He shot his wife's agent for presumably being an adulterer and went to prison for it. And he was so shocked by the conditions in the prison experience wherever he was. I'm not sure where he was holed up. But ultimately, this experience inspired him to make a quote-unquote message film about prison conditions, about how workers or how prisoners suffer certain injustices and indignities. And that's how this film came to be. Do you have his name yet?
Yeah. The producer was Walter Wagner.
That's it.
Yeah, he spent a 4-month prison term for shooting Jennings Lang. And his wife, he was married to, at the time, Joan Bennett. And the director of this was Don Siegel. And if you haven't heard of Riot in Cell Block 11, you probably have heard of the movie that those two would go on to make 2 years later, which is Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956.
Aha.
Yes.
I didn't know that they were a duo for that as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, and another connection here to using members of the crew and casting in this film is that one of the leads, Leo Gordon, he had served 5 years for armed robbery at San Quentin as well. So this, and they filmed this at Folsom Prison, and they used a lot of the prisoners as extras in the filming of this movie. But before we get too far, we should probably I'm just going to give the real brief here IMDb summary of the film. And it says, fed up with inhumane prison living conditions, a general prison riot breaks out, leading to hostage-taking, a standoff with the guards, and eventual negotiations with the prison administration officials. So that's a general rundown, and I think that is basically the story. I mean, there's not a whole lot of complexity to it.
No.
But it is an enjoyable film. They do use also some documentary footage of a prison riot that happened in Michigan, which this is also loosely based on.
Interesting. I noted the beginning is sort of a drawn-out newsreel type of setup where they have a voice announcer speaking to a variety of prison unrest scenarios, outbreaks all around the United States,
Yes.
New York and Texas or wherever. But I think part of the reason was they were trying to establish that this prison reform concern that is part of the messaging of this film was an issue nationwide and not related solely to this one prison.
Yes.
It was a slow start, I would say. I was wondering if I was going to hear the MST robots making fun of it at the beginning until we broke with the newsreel after about 5 minutes, and then we entered into Folsom. I mean, it was filmed in Folsom Prison. And we spend the rest of our time there as things get going pretty quick, and then we get to know some of the prison players, I guess you'd say, call them the prisoners. Are there any of these? There were 3, I think, lead prison guys,
Yes,
sort of leading the riot, and then a variety of other folks. But do any of those guys stand out to you as being like the key?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the 3 that you're talking about is we have Dunn, who's sort of the lead instigator of this from the beginning. Then we have crazy, I think it's crazy Mike Carney, who's supposed he's supposed to be sort of the psychopath, criminal.
Yeah. That's funny because I didn't really get psychopath.
No.
I got hot-headed,
Yes.
and he was a strapped dude. He was the tough guy, but they kept calling him a psychopath, and I just didn't really see it on the screen.
No, they did play that part down. They just sort of implied it. And then we have a character referred to as the Colonel, who is this is, of course, taking place not that long after World War II. So a lot of both the actors and the prisoners in this are supposed to have military experience. And the Colonel we've seen this come up in multiple films, but the ex-military guy who gets into a barroom brawl and kills somebody in a bar fight ends up in prison for manslaughter. And this guy, the Colonel, is no different. And he sort of plays the
reluctant.
The reluctant guy who realizes that things need to change, but he doesn't really think the riot is the answer, but he writes the demands that the prisoners ultimately have in this case.
Yeah, he believes in the principles, if not the strategy or tactics of the rioters.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what was that, in the 90s, the film The Siege, I think it's called, which takes place in a military prison. There is a tropey narrative to this, but in an underlying thing about this film is the social commentary, and it is definitely, it's a lot of the things that they're talking about are as important today as they were in the 50s when this was originally produced, and the demands that the prisoners have are pretty by today's standards pretty straightforward. They want work programs so that they can better themselves while in prison. They want the removal of like leg restraints and excessive, what do we want to say?
Yeah, leg shackles or leg holds.
Yeah.
And yeah.
They're in a cell block 11, thus the title of the film, is in a block of the prison that was condemned by the state 2 years ago, but the state has done nothing to correct the issue or remodel it. They want things like light and access to outside. That's
very, very reasonable demands.
Yeah.
They're not demanding a yacht to Malta or some absurd extravagant shit. They're asking about pretty basic human rights, and they make fairly reasonable arguments for these rights. And interestingly enough, the warden is sympathetic to their plight to an extent and listens. So there's very much a humanization on all sides here, which I find valuable and I think is crucially important, especially in times where people are drawing hard lines in the sand and refusing to speak across aisles about issues that matter to everybody.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast Ear Hustle. Have you heard of that?
I am not. I am not.
Okay. Well, Ear Hustle is, I believe it's in its second or third season now, but it's a podcast that originates out of San Quentin prison. And it was a project initiated by, forget what exactly, a prison education project, but they do a lot of interviews with prisoners, and the prisoners were part of the production team and all of this sort of thing. And it's a very informative and good show about life inside a prison, and they cover a lot of different issues. But a lot of the things they bring up in that podcast, and they do work somewhat in conjunction with then it has to be approved by the prison, of course. But a lot of the things they talk about in there are still, the types of issues that are brought up in this film. So kind of interesting to see those parallels.
Totally. Yeah, I did mention the cinematography at the start, but there are some great scenes early on. I took quite a few photographs when I was watching it, and I'll actually put them on the Point Blank page when we advertise this mini episode in a couple days. But just real nice chiaroscuro capturing of light and shadow, and the immensity of the isolation in the prison itself, the way that the camera angle was aimed from the second story down a long corridor showing all the cell blocks devoid of life. Just some heavy-duty, solitary type shit that was reminiscent of the quarantine we're experiencing, but even more extreme, obviously. And hence the reason we chose this story. We wanted to pick a quarantine film or a film about people being entrapped in a prison-like setup, and here we are.
Yeah.
But I would definitely give this a thumbs up. I would give this a 4 or 5 hits because I really did enjoy it.
Yeah, I thought it was a good standout film, and I just wanted to share a couple quotes, or just really one quote that I really liked from this. They're talking. This is between the warden and I believe one of the state government officials, and they're sort of discussing one of the prisoners who is responsible for the demands and kind of leading this riot, and he says to the warden something about him being a psychopath, and the warden says something about he's intelligent, and then he says he's also a psycho, like a lot of brilliant men on the outside.
Yes, I noted that quote too.
I thought that was a really astute good line from the warden there. And I think he's actually kind of in a lot of ways the most interesting character, because he kind of plays both sides of what's going on in a lot of ways. And there's even a line there about how the governor says, well, the demands these guys are making are the same things you've been talking to me about for 2 years. And then the warden's kind of like, well, yeah, I told you this was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very socially aware. He's very, 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 considerate. Yeah. Considers all the aspects of his situation and makes relatively good decisions. We're not going to spoil the film here, but
no.
I agree with you that he is an interesting character. And a couple other tidbits I wanted to share. One is that the director Sam Peckinpah got his start working on this film. It was one of the first films he had a hand in, not as a director, but just as some kind of lower level assistant type thing. He went on to do The Wild Bunch and a whole bunch of other shoot 'em up, ultra violent films of the late 70s or late 60s, early 70s, revisionist westerns and all that. So it's interesting to note where people start. But also, the thing I liked about this film is that they talked about the guards themselves, the quote-unquote screws, more than once, emphasizing how they're just working-class Joes. They don't get paid well. They don't have. They're not treated well economically. They have to work many jobs in order to have a meager living. They're stretched thin. I like that. I like when films speak to the idea of the working class being used to exploit other working class people in a way that wasn't exactly like propagandistic or like some message that they harped on, but just to look at the facts. That's a fact. And I think having that kind of even subtle class analysis is, not very common, and it's a pleasure and noted when I see it.
Yeah, and that was interesting because, they do threaten to kill the guards that they've taken hostage during this. But
sure, there's a power differential that can't be denied.
But the one guard that they particularly target is the guy who is, they sort of call him out. They don't even call him out as necessarily being cruel. And they sort of they says something like, "I'm just a guard here," and he goes, and the prisoners go, "Well, yeah, that's part of the problem," and then he says something like, "Well, I treat you all the same. I treat you like convicts," and then the convicts are like, "Well, yeah, that's the reason why we're targeting you, is because you
that's the problem, pal.
you don't treat us like people, you treat us like convicts," which, is, I mean, in a way, there were some things on this film where I think, it could have been, if this was not filmed in this era, the brutality would have been ramped up a bit and shown, perhaps, I don't know, more accurately, but it still works in this film.
Sure. Yeah, you get enough of the punch 'em ups, but yeah, there's not, sheer brutality is obviously less, and this is in post-code Hollywood. So the fact that there was any messaging at all is surprising.
Yeah, and then, well, we're not going to discuss the end, but the ending does kind of meet the code, but it also makes it a noir film with a lesson in sometimes what happens when you stand up for something.
Yeah, exactly. You can't always get what you want.
That's right. But yeah, Riot in Cell Block 11, I highly recommend it. Like you said, it's I think this is like maybe not a 5-star film, but a strong 4 out of 5-star film.
Definitely. So here we are, Kurt. We're in the midst of a serious quarantine. This has never happened before in our lifetimes and may not happen again. And we are still trying to keep the point blank train rolling. We are both stressed to the max with our own life stuff, as all humans are right now. But we are getting prepped to record our next full-length episodes. They're both going to be on Richard Stark's The Hunter, and that should be coming out to you within the month. But the one that's coming up more sooner than that, which is the one that I'm still editing, are the 2 episodes dedicated to Philip K. Dick's Blade Runner, aka Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And that first one will be out to you probably within the week. So
excellent.
You can look forward to that, folks.
Yeah, and if we'll see what happens, but if I end up having to stay home here for a while, I might do some more short film reviews, either solo or with you, if that works out. So we will see. Point blank listeners, it's new territory for everybody.
Yep. So hang in there and reach out to us if you have questions or just want to chat about this stuff. We know anxiety is high. It's nice to know you have people around who are willing to listen. So
we'll see you on the next episode. In the meantime, keep your hands clean.
Yes, wash them up.
Bye-bye.
Bye.